Hey, welcome to the Bodies Built Better podcast. I'm your host, Jackie Chan, and I want to say thank you for joining me today. On the show, we explore the fascinating world of human performance and what it means to perform at your best. I chat with experts, athletes, and people like you and me about their experience of pursuing greatness and their best tips, tools, and strategies in discovering their extraordinary potential. And this is another Fringe Edition special episode, which I'm so excited to bring you. Obviously, the Fringe has come to an end now, but it was an incredible season. I think they made history with selling over 1 million tickets, which is just incredible. So I truly hope that all the artists felt the financial reward, the incredible excitement and support of audiences too. So I truly hope it's been a Fringe to remember for all involved. And today on the show, I chat with the first ever foot juggler to come out of New Zealand and the only Western artist to perform Chinese style foot juggling. Her name is Emma Phillips, and she is extraordinary. She's just finished the Adelaide Fringe season performing a new show, The Party with Strut and Fret, where she has left audiences in awe of her incredible talent and impeccable timing. She makes it look so easy juggling multiple umbrellas and a table on her feet. And if you think that's hard enough, because it really bloody well is, she then goes on to juggle with her hands whilst juggling with her feet. It's just insane. It's completely mesmerizing, and the show is so much fun. It was such a delight to watch. So if you missed out, that's real bad luck. But I think they're performing in Newcastle. So if you can get over there, check it out. It's just so much fun. Emma is such an incredible performer with the most incredible story. Emma spent over 2.5 years training at two of the most prestigious schools in China, where she was taught the traditional art of foot juggling. Her recount of this experience is dark and lonely, but what shines through is her incredible strength, resilience, determination, and her commitment to herself and her craft. She has a remarkable sense of what is meant to be for her and has listened to her intuition her whole life. And it shows because she's just doing incredible things. Emma's dedication to her craft is truly inspiring, and I can't wait for you to hear her story. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode with Emma Phillips. Emma, thank you so much for chatting with me today. Welcome to the Bodies Built Better podcast.
Yes, so happy to be here.
I mean, we've had some pretty epic conversations whilst you're on the table. I'm like, I have to get her on the podcast because I just find what you do so fascinating. So you're a foot juggler, and that's, I mean, you hear of juggling, but foot juggling. And I've watched some of your videos on your website, and you're also an aerialist. And I just find it so incredible that you can just be so incredible at so many things. So before we dive deep into all of that, tell us firstly, The Party. How is the show going?
The party is a fun time. You'll see it tomorrow night.
Yeah.
Excited. The party is just fun. Like, we're not trying to do anything deep and crazy. We're just having fun. And it's really like, that's pretty transparent on stage, you know, like it's just a great energy. It's a good time.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Can't wait to see it. Looking forward to it. So tell us, how did you get into what you do into circus? Would you say it's circus that this is for you?
It is. I do always struggle with saying circus, just because I feel like on this side of the world it has such a weird connotation. People immediately go to clowns and animals.
Sure, yeah.
So I really, yeah, it is circus. But yeah, it is a strange one to sort of. Yeah. But so I started in dance. Originally, I was like, I think I was 3 when I started. I was just obsessed. My sister was put in. to like help with her shyness, and I was the 3-year-old like at the door of the studio, like, let me in. Yeah, so I got into dance, and I was just obsessed. Like that was like my life. That was my like everything. Like it was like full on love, full on like everything. So that was like my entire childhood and teenage years revolved around dance and being on stage. And yeah, I was not the best. I was not particularly even good, but I was just like my entire heart was invested. Like,
so how did then you evolve into performing in juggling and aerial and all of that?
So it was a pretty difficult sort of transition to find the right pathway, because yeah, I sort of finished up dance. I ended up having some pretty bad problems with my hips because I was forcing turnout, as you know, my shallow hip sockets. So I was forcing and I had no strength. I didn't have very good technical training. So my body was just really, really in bad shape, pretty much. I had no strength with anything what I was doing. So I was just relying on being flexible, but like everything was really a mess. So I had to stop ballet, just because it was like I couldn't walk. I was ruining my hips. And then I sort of just had this like absolute like, you know, not a midlife crisis, a very early on life crisis where, you know, I was like, my identity was a dancer. And then I suddenly couldn't, it was suddenly like, you're not going to ever be a dancer. Like, you know, like that realization came, you know, you always dreamed that's what you're going to do. Then it was like, no, face reality. Like you're not, you don't have the body type. You don't look like a dancer and you have none of the technique or, you know, like you're never gonna, this is not realistic. So that was like pretty horrific. And looking back now, of course, there was no knowledge of mental health or anything there, but I'm like, oh, that screwed me up a lot. Like, with body dysmorphia and all of that stuff, all sort of like wrapped nicely into that little package. And then in kind of like, as I was just like completely lost, my dad took me to Cirque du Soleil. So when I was 15, and that was the first time I'd really seen circus like that. Like circus had never been a part of my life. I grew up in a small town in New Zealand and just don't have it. I think maybe there was like a really crappy touring circus that was just rough. Like, but you never saw it in dance. There wasn't the acrobatics like there is now. So I was like I would like go on Google and print out photos and like try stuff like,
oh, wow.
Because I'd be like, I was quite flexible and I'd want to try the stuff, but we didn't have any of the resources.
So you would essentially teach yourself.
Yeah, I was trying to teach myself. It was so bad. Do not recommend. But like that was my research because, you know, it's so different now, social media and everything. But we just didn't have the resources. I didn't see anything else. No one was doing it. So then when I saw Cirque du Soleil, it was like, hang on a sec. It was like a marriage of two worlds, like dance and performance. And I'd always been told my flexibility was a bad thing, that I was too like unstable and I was loose and I couldn't, you know, like it was never a good thing. And then I saw these performers with this amazing flexibility, but using it in different ways. And then it was like, you know, like it was so much more creative than just, you know, just doing ballet or just doing dance, because it was like acrobatics and the music and the costumes and the makeup and the character work. Like, yeah, it was just that, like literally just like not cheesy as hell, but like lit a flame. Like,
yeah. And how did you then pursue that newfound love?
So once again, with the absolute lack of internet, I found in one of like the women's magazines, you know, like weekly magazines in New Zealand, they did an article on Cirque du Soleil, and they put at the bottom of it, like, if you want to run away to the circus, New Zealand has a circus school. And I was like, right, use my mum's email. Emailed them, and she gets an email back and was like, why is a circus school emailing me? So yeah, I like sort of started a conversation with Circo Arts, which was a circus school in New Zealand. And yeah, then I sort of decided in my last year of high school that that's what I was going to do. I was going to go become a circus artist. But it did not work out how I planned.
No.
Yeah, I thought I was dreaming. I always wanted to go to a full-time, you know, ballet school. And I really craved the discipline of it, you know, like I wanted to be in like an environment where I'm like, you know, you wake up, you go to class, you know, you're like just like living to do this thing.
Yeah.
So I was really hoping for that, and like, oh, it's gonna be really serious. I'm gonna be like training hard, and it just wasn't. It's a very small New Zealand school that doesn't exist anymore because of the earthquakes in Christchurch.
Oh,
but it's just the school's more focused towards street performance. Pretty much just that, really. You didn't learn. I was there 2 years and I didn't learn a single name of a big international show or a European variety or any of that sort of. So it's just very different. It's just wasn't tailored to what I wanted to do. And I did have to try out you had to try out everything, but the physical conditioning was really, really, it was horrific there, actually. They just gave you no training. They just put you straight up onto things. So I was this dancer with shoulders that couldn't stay in my sockets, put up onto a rope and, popping shoulders and things all falling out. And so it was not a good introduction to circus at all. It was just like, I couldn't hold scapula in place. I couldn't engage my core. I could do nothing. And then I was just put on these things and would just get so injured. So it was not really, there's other circus schools in the world that would do like 2 months just of conditioning. And as boring as that is, that prepares you physically as an athlete, whereas none of this was preparing you as an athlete. But I mean, it's sometimes I would find it frustrating thinking I like lost 2 years sort of going to that school. But then also I think it gave me, it taught me certain lessons, and it's like, you can't just like jumpstart your future and be like, go straight from like 0 to like exactly where you want to go. Like you've got to trudge through mud. And like, that sort of taught me some incredibly sort of like tough lessons. And then I ended up working in a traditional circus in New Zealand afterwards, which was an experience. And once again, just sort of showed me exactly where I didn't want to be. And I was didn't have a lot of respect or anything like that there. So I kind of learned that if I ever wanted to be respected as a person or as an artist, that I needed to have more skills.
So what skills did you have?
Very basic. Like just the fact that I had the dance background made me able to fluff so much, because I could do, I did an aerial act that had like barely a trick in it, but I made a costume and I had the music and I did the fluff. And the same, I did this little baby.
So for people who don't know what fluff is,
are
we talking like
I would be like, just doing like so many different types of splits, which were like easy. You're sitting on a hoop and I'd just be like, oh, there we go. And the audience are like, oh, another split. I'm like, I couldn't even do a pull up onto the hoop. Like, and I did a comedy contortion act actually, which was the time. Things I used to do. But I used my like background as a dancer to really get through that sort of like, I could make an act that was very wholesome. When I look back on it, I'm like, oh my God, like very basic. But it definitely like, it really just taught me that if I wanted to be where I wanted to be and I wanted to work in Europe, that I had to have skills to back it up.
So when you're like during that entire period, did you know at the time, they're throwing you up on hoops or whatever, rings, and you're like, this isn't good, I need a proper foundation? Like, did you know that? You didn't?
No.
So
I just thought it was me. Like, really? Because just some of the training and the language used and it was very shaming.
Oh gosh.
Yeah. So it was more just that I was bad and I was useless and I was overweight and I was, so it was more that. So I was just like, oh gosh, I must be awful. Instead of someone going like, so to engage this, you really just need to focus on this, stepping you through something, especially when you've never hung on something in your life and you're, like hanging out of your shoulder joints. But of course I didn't know that. So I just took it all on. I was very, very young. I was only 17 and some of the other people in the school were in their late 30s or 40s. So it was a time.
So what happens next?
So then, once again, I was sort of like, wow, this is not what I was hoping when I was dreaming of being a performer. So while I was in this circus and I was really like, I don't ever want to have to be doing this. This is not this is not the dream. This is not good for me. I did a lot of research, and I wasn't good enough to get into any circus school in the world. There's a circus school in Australia called NICA, and I auditioned twice after being in the New Zealand school for 2 years, and I still couldn't get in. Because I couldn't do anything, and it was just a basic audition of, push-ups and climbing the ropes and doing things. And I still couldn't do any of that because I just had so many injuries, and I just, didn't have a proper training or base at all. So that was pretty crushing when I didn't get into NICA. And so then I found out through whispers, just random, you just hear people mentioning that you could go to China. And then when that was sort of being talked about, I saw Juggler, which is a Cirque du Soleil show, and there's a Chinese foot juggler who juggles umbrellas. And I remember just watching that, and it was just like my heart, because I hadn't found something in circus that I loved yet. I hadn't found my thing. I wanted to do aerials, but I just did not have the strength or the body type for aerials. I wanted to do contortion, but they didn't train it at the school I was at. And I was also had no strength, so I would have just been broken. But I saw that, and I was just like, I could never, I could never do something like that. That is so technical and so difficult. So that sort of really ignited something in me then. And then, I found out, it was so hard in those days. I think that must have been in 2010. So, trying to email with China. Yeah. So I managed to, and I sent this whole video, and then I get this official letter in Chinese with the official stamp, and I could go and get my visa.
Whoa.
So I was just like, okay, I'm going to China for 5 months.
Tell us more about that, because that blows my mind. Are you the only New Zealander or, Westerner there?
So
what's that whole
the first experience? School I went to was called the Beijing International Art School. It's one of the most prestigious schools in China. So they have faculties in ballet and classical Chinese dance, calligraphy, music, martial arts, and acrobatics. So they have these, segments of the school. It's a massive, massive school. So it's very, very prestigious. Children are selected from all around the country to go there. So when I went there the first time, they had about 10 foreigners there. And these foreigners were, there's some from Australia and America and Canada and France, and they were all incredibly talented. They actually, pretty much all of them ended up in Cirque du Soleil afterwards. They were that good. And the teachers really focused on the students. You had a lot of time with your teacher, a lot of focus. And so for that first, it was just 5 months that I was there. It was a really good introduction. I was training contortion at that stage as well. So I was doing contortion and foot juggling. And especially for foot juggling to start with umbrellas, you need a teacher by your side constantly. You can't practice it by yourself. Your teacher is there standing holding an umbrella for hours.
Really?
Yeah, you cannot practice without someone. So it's really hands-on. Just because the balance is extremely difficult, you can't balance it without help. It just would, you can't even put it up there. It just falls off your feet straight away. So you literally are just there for hours with your teacher just holding the umbrella and just going like, right.
And so what is that teaching you? Just how to manage
it's really fine motor skills, because it's a really strange thing of the umbrella balance. You can make it look so easy, but it's so specific. It literally sits on this little pad of your foot, and you're pointing your foot, but you're relaxing your toes, but using your toes to control. And you're like the smallest amount from your ankle joint, and then you have to really focus on where in your hip it's coming from, that you're not using your knees at all. So it's really just it's so different to anything else that you just, and it just feels so unnatural at the start. So it's just hours and hours and hours and hours of repetition and just learning. And I would start, I think it took probably weeks before I would balance it for a few seconds by myself. and you'd start in a wider stance and then you'd go down and down. And so I came out of that 5 months being able to do barely nothing.
Really?
Oh God, it was so basic. Like I could just get it on my feet and maybe do like a half a turn to the other side and then maybe balance it on the handle. Like basic, absolute foundations.
So then 5 months goes by and that's all you can do then?
Yeah. And you're like, oh, I came to China. I thought I'd be like, tick.
Exactly.
I'm it now. But the Chinese also always say with umbrellas that it's 7 years before you're on stage.
Whoa. How long did it take you?
Well, I mean, okay, I did go on stage after 5 months and it was the worst performance of my life. I completely embarrassed myself.
We all learned from that.
Exactly. Right? I did. It was actually horrific. But it also
what made it horrific.
I literally froze on stage and could not do anything. I just couldn't. I was unable to juggle anything. And then I made myself nervous and I freaked out and I just couldn't do anything. And then I was actually pretty verbally abused by an ex-boss afterwards publicly. So it was like a double whammy. But it actually kind of needed to happen because I came back from China and was a little bit arrogant and was like, I've been to China. Like, you know, even though I could do nothing, I'd been to China and I was not training. Like, and so when he sort of like had an absolute go at me, he pointed out some pretty honest things. Like, you know, and was just like, you know, you don't put in any effort, you don't train. Like, who you think you are? Like, you think you're going to become someone? Like, you're going to be you know, like you put nothing in. Like, you're so entitled, you know, like, so it was awful, but it was also like
necessary.
It was true. Yeah. I didn't train.
And so how did you take that in the moment?
Oh, horrifically.
Okay.
Absolutely horrifically. It was just brutal. And because I'd already just embarrassed myself in front of everyone. Yeah. It was definitely one of those performances that you have those nightmare ones, you know, where you're literally on stage and you're like, I've forgotten how to do anything. And the music just keeps going and you're like, I think my umbrella got caught in some fairy lights at one stage. You know, and you're just like, I'm now destroying the stage. Like, it was so bad.
So then what happens? Like, you decide to go back?
So that, I actually broke my foot.
Did you? So on top of all of that.
Yeah, I broke my foot. Yeah. And so I was, that was pretty unfortunate. And then it didn't heal properly because I got lost in the hospital system. And so, yeah, that was pretty tough. To get by. And so I was again in a pretty dark place, you know, and you're like, how am I ever gonna, you know, I've got this dream that is so ridiculous. Everyone's telling me that like I'm never gonna make it, that I'm just like, you know, just like give up on that, you know, like you're a joke, go get a job in retail. And I, you know, I was just like, oh, I feel like I haven't really, I can't give up now. Like, and I had a partner in New Zealand and I was like, I must have been 21. And, you know, I had the boyfriend and had you know, was flatting with him and all that. I'm like, you know, your life, you see it. I could stay and I could do that. And I could teach some circus, maybe, you know, teach some community circus, maybe do a little gig at a bar or an event, you know, like, but I was just like, there was just this thing inside me that was like, that's not my life. Like, that's not it.
That you listened to that.
It was hard. And because especially there was not really a lot of support, just because what I wanted to do was pretty crazy. Like I wanted to go back to China. You know, it meant leaving my boyfriend. It meant leaving my family and just doing something so like risky, you know, like, and I was working that whole year just to make money to go. And then, I went back to China and I went back on a one-way ticket. Like,
whoa.
Yeah.
What were you expecting? You've only bought a one-way ticket.
So I was expecting to go back to the Beijing school and to have the same training that I'd had. But it was very different. So this time there was double the amount of foreign students. The teachers were just so jaded because they accepted anyone. So there would be people who have never actually done acrobatics ever there. And then they're getting Chinese treatment. And so they hated it, you know, so they'd complain, they'd cry, they'd just not be putting in training. Like the first time I was there, when you're with these, these incredible artists who would, go off to still have these world-class careers, who would be doing 8 hours of handstand training a day, and then you've got these other people who are sort of like just doing it for a bit of fun, and it was more of a social thing. So the teachers just did not want to train. They just didn't want to put the effort in, because they're just like, they already had such a sort of preconceived sort of, judgment of foreigners that we're lazy and, like entitled. And it's like, well, we kind of were proving that.
Yeah, exactly.
And then unfortunately, my teacher for foot juggling, I think I only had her 2 times a week for 3 hours. And I was like, I think I used to have her 4 times a week for a few hours, and then the contortion teacher she just did not care. She was busy with this. She had all these Chinese girls, like the little proteges, and she'd kind of come over to us and like push you in a stretch, and then half an hour, like come back. And so I was just like, I was there for 6 months, and it was social. There was a lot of foreigners and stuff, but I was just like, had that feeling again that I was like, I'm not doing what I should be doing. Like, I'm not pushing myself. This still isn't it. Like, I wasn't progressing very fast with umbrellas either, because I didn't have, the teacher training. And at that stage, you really need you need direction. So I was just really unsure. So I started looking to other options within China. And of course, most Chinese schools do not accept foreigners, because there's been a lot of like, the Chinese method is, extreme.
Yeah.
It's brutal, and it's not legal, like in most other countries.
Right.
So there was like a very famous documentary done a few years ago on the Shanghai Circus School, and they let in foreign media, and it became like almost like a human rights
okay, so
sort of thing.
That's already public. What are we talking?
So that was just abuse, just physical and emotional abuse. Yeah, just extreme. And it's just Chinese mentality. It's their way.
Did you know this going?
Oh, I'd seen a little bit of it in Beijing. Yeah, I'd seen a little bit.
Okay.
Saw a lot. Yeah. When I was in the Beijing school, you were pretty blinded from it, because you were mainly with the foreigners.
Right.
But so that's just mainly why the schools then don't really like having foreigners come in, because they're like, no, you guys came in, you caused trouble, you're giving us a bad name. For Chinese, like saving face is really important. So they don't want to be like publicly shamed or anything like that. But I found one school that was a very small school, but it was in the hometown of acrobatics. So where acrobatics was born 2,000 years ago.
Whoa.
Like, how mad is that? I'm from New Zealand. Like, we're like,
it's incredible.
It's crazy. So I caught a train down, which was terrifying, because I had very, very basic Mandarin. Caught a train from, I'd been in Beijing, like this absolute, like metropolis. And then was like, I got off the train and I was in a farm village in China. And I luckily had this incredible friend who was Australian, and she went to university in Taiwan. So she spoke Mandarin. So I had her on the phone the entire day. And I got to the school and I walked in and I thought, oh, maybe it's like under construction. It was quite small. There was just rubble everywhere and things. It wasn't. that was the school. But it was like sheep on the road, and like, it was insane. It was just such a contrast from Beijing. And I had her on the phone the whole day, and I'd be like, can you ask them if I can do this? And they were really skeptical. Like, I'd done some videos of me training, and they're like, what is this? And I was just like, please, can I come here? I'll train really hard. And they're like, oh, like, we don't even have a room ready. Like, there's this like old sort of like rundown room. Like, and I'm like, I don't care. Just give me anything. Like, I'll come. And yeah, it was just, I don't know. I feel like I trust my gut a lot in life. And there, I was just like, I'm meant to be here.
Oh, wow.
I'm meant to be here. This is where I remember standing out, and there was this like oval that they're meant to like, be running around, and it was like overgrown. There was weeds everywhere. It was like this like derelict, it was mad. And I was just standing there and was just like, I'm meant to be here. Like, this is where I'm coming back. Like, I'm staying here. And I got back on the train to Beijing, and I packed up my things, and I think I moved down 3 days later.
And how long were you there for?
14 months.
Amazing. And at what point did you did you feel like you were getting better, you were getting the hang of it? And
Oof.
was it the same as like this other place where you've got a teacher 3 or 4 days a week for a couple of hours? Like, was it the same sort of
So
thing?
no. So that's why I wanted to go there. So there I had a teacher 6 days a week.
Oh wow. For
Like
how long?
probably like 6 to 8 hours a day.
Oh wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so yeah, how did you feel in terms of your progression?
So I went backwards instantly because it was a slightly different teacher. It was like over twice the training I had been doing. Just the physical fatigue, everything. And then I went into winter and there was no heating. So it was negative 18 degrees in the training room.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I would have these like little plug-in like hot bags, like unlike a hot water bottle that you plug in.
Yeah.
And me and my teacher would just have 2 on rotation been plugged in, and I'd have to put them inside. I'd be juggling with socks on my hands because my hands were so cold. It was crazy. So then that then was so hard, like your body was just, you're trying to foot juggle with your legs upside down.
Yeah.
And they're numb. And that's when I started learning table. And the table hitting my feet was like, like when you get in the bath, when you've got cold feet and you get in a hot bath, it was that, but like bam, 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 bam. It's like I used to come home and put my feet in a bucket that was like hot water and honghua like red flower oil. It's like a really hot, spicy, like chili oil that you use for your muscles. And I'd like fill a bucket with that in hot water and just sit there and be like, just cry.
And then have to do it the next day all over again.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, it paid off because I love this quote. Emma is the first performer in the world to combine umbrella and table juggling in the same act, a feat that even the Chinese told her would be impossible.
Yes, they really did. They really emphasized that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So how did you have that conversation? I want to juggle tables.
So
by the way, can you speak Mandarin at this stage? Like
no. Oh, so my Mandarin when I got there was like very basic. I could like say I'm hungry. Say like, yes, no, good, bad. But then if they asked a question, I was like, well, I'm gone. Like I remember trying to explain that I was vegetarian. And they're like, but you eat chicken. It's like, no. Pork? I'm like, no. Lamb? No. I'm like, oh, wow. So my Chinese was very basic. And so at the start, they did not like me there as well. They just thought I was a joke because they thought I was just fat and old and lazy and stupid. And I had to really earn their respect, which is just part of Chinese culture. And it's something that I respect from their culture as well. Like they don't just give you, it has to be like a two-way thing. Yeah. So part of that was learning the language, that the more I could communicate and the more that they saw that I was really making an effort to communicate, they would give me so much more attention and trust. And then I had one of the other teachers who was in the room, he would give me some like really important little cultural things sometimes because the culture is so different. So I made a lot of mistakes with offending people with different cultural mistake, things that I would just never know. And oh gosh, giving gifts. I was in a training room with a group of girls and boys who were like the proteges of the schools. And my mum was amazing. She used to send over like packages of like coffee and chocolate and things. So I was like, oh, can you put some like bags of lollies in for the kids? And then some like nice New Zealand chocolate for the teachers. So I gave, the girls and the boys their bag of like mixed lollies first. And then I went to give the teachers their chocolate. And I told them I was getting them. So they were like, oh, so excited to try like New Zealand chocolate. And they refused it. They all were just like, no.
For the kids and the teachers?
The kids took it, the teachers refused. And I was like, what have I done? And like, so one of them afterwards came and told me, and he was like, oh, so you gave the kids theirs first and theirs was bigger. And I was like, no, but theirs was one bag of lollies for like 12 kids and I'm giving you one block of chocolate per person. It's like, no. So I was like, oh my gosh. So there was a lot of things like that where I offended people. My teacher would sometimes ignore me for days. Quite early on, I was training on a Saturday and I was having Saturdays were the worst. You were so tired and you're like mentally, physically, I was a wreck. And I'd have to do tricks. She wouldn't let me get off my chair until I did 30 of a trick or something like this. And, you'd get to 29 and then drop. She's like, okay, do it again. It was brutal. And you'd be like shaking, cramped, crying. I used to be like, oh, it's easy to cry on a foot juggling chair because the tears just go straight down. They don't come down your face. You're like, nope. Yeah, you're like, I can just lay here and cry because it just like funnels down the side. But there was one Saturday I was just I was really angry at myself and I was dropping my umbrellas and I was probably being a little bit too forceful, like grabbing them and pulling them back and just being a bit too I was angry at myself and I was just being like, ugh. And then I came in on Monday and my teacher ignored me. And usually I started with stretching and she'd usually come and stretch me physically. She didn't come and stretch me. And then I was meant to move on to foot juggling and we had a real routine. And I was like, what have I done? She's like, you know what you've done. And I was just like, no, I really don't. And she just carried it on for days to the point where I was at her knees, begging and crying and being like, I'm an idiot. She used to call me most of the time. My name was Idiot, been done. So I was just like, I'm an idiot. I'm a silly foreigner. I don't know what I've done. Please help me. Please teach me. Please teach her. And it took her 3 days to be like, you hit your umbrellas. And she's like, if you hit your umbrellas, it's hitting your teacher.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, no. And I was like, no. I was angry at me. Yeah. I wasn't angry at you. It was all, I was, that was completely about me. And yeah, she was just like, no, didn't accept it. So
what at the end of the day, what helped? What?
I just had to I literally begged for her forgiveness. And then it was just me being really self-deprecating and being like, I'm the idiot. I'm so stupid. It's because I'm a silly foreigner. I don't understand Chinese.
What did that do to you?
Oh.
and how much work do you then have to do for yourself to get past that?
Oh, I am still I'm kind of only just touching the surface of it now, I feel like. I had no awareness of mental health at all then, literally none. We didn't talk about it. No one talked about it, and when I look back now, I'm like, oh man, I was fully emotionally abused by my teachers, pretty horrifically. They really built that trust and that full reliance until you were the only person, they were the only person to you that mattered.
Yeah.
And she was my only person, I had no one else. So she could do the tiniest things and it would just destroy you, and I was in full isolation. I had there was no other people my age. There's no foreigners, there was no nothing. So, the actual isolation, I lost my mind 100%. Looking back now, I'm like, oh yeah, I used to talk to myself in the mirror because I forgot I wouldn't hear English.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was absolutely crazy. Sometimes I'm like, my God, imagine how I would have gone if I actually had the tools, to imagine if I had online counseling at the same time. Imagine if I had a therapist that I could talk to on Zoom, because I just internalized it all. I just took it all on. And I also couldn't talk to anyone about it. Even years later, it was like, oh, that was your decision though.
Oh, wow.
So, and I think that was just I think also people didn't really know the depths of what I'd gone through, and the abuse I witnessed. And just being, it was almost interesting when we went through the pandemic and people were in isolation and, people being in their apartments for months on end and not seeing people. I was almost like, that is very similar to what I went through, because we didn't have internet barely. So I would think I spoke to 3 friends in a year and a half.
Whoa.
You weren't messaging people. There wasn't to get on, Facebook was the only way of contact. And to get on Facebook, you had to have a VPN that worked, and that would sometimes take an hour. And just as it would load, it would cut off. So yeah, I barely spoke to people. I would talk to my family. We'd try on Skype, but the connection was horrific. It was just so hard. So you could never really have a conversation. Yeah, that was like 14 months of that.
Okay. Wow. So then during this entire period, is there a point where you go, I'm getting better at this, staying here is the right decision, or is there ever a point where you go, I need to get out?
Yeah, so they're definitely, you'd have those small wins that would make it worth it, that you'd just, and they were pretty few and far between, like, because it was sort of with the progress of foot juggling, sometimes it would just take so long. So I would try and like celebrate those wins, like, if I got something, just sort of like, because my teacher wouldn't, like, it was just the way that, like, she'd tell me all the time how bad I was, how awful it was, that, and then as soon as I did something like really good, her way of celebrating would be like, and you'd be like, yes, like that was the biggest, she'd never be like, well done, so it would be like those little things. If I got like a little look from her, I'd be like, oh my God, yes, like, so that was like definitely, the little wins in the skills is what kept me wanting to be there. I don't know if I ever had moments where I was like, I actually want to leave. I never felt like I wanted to leave. I definitely felt like hopeless, and like I felt lost, and I felt like at times, like, it was all pointless, like, like I was never going to reach my dreams, like, why am I even doing this? But for me, it was never an option to return to New Zealand. It was not even an option. And I still have massive hang-ups with, I think I programmed myself then that if I returned to New Zealand, I was a failure. So I now still have that, and I'm still working on that. And so that was actually quite hard, being stuck in the pandemic in New Zealand. I did not live there. I've not lived there in 12 years, but because I was living in Germany, but I got stuck there for the pandemic, and I still had this hang up of like, oh, I'm a failure because I'm in New Zealand. Like, it means I haven't, like, and I think that's just left over from then, and me telling myself, I remember talking to like my mum at one stage, was like, no one's keeping you there. Like, you can leave if you want. Like, no one is forcing you there. And I was like, I know, but I am. Like, I'd never really, before this, I was never very hardworking. I was pretty entitled. I didn't, like, put in extra work, or I would love to find an excuse to get out of things.
Really?
Yes. But China literally, no, but I was. And that's what I mean when I had that horrific performance before I went back the second time, was because I didn't even train for it.
Right.
I had a performance lined up and I didn't even train. I was just like, be fine. And I couldn't, because I was doing a skill that you have to train. Like, so, and that's what, for me, like, being in Wu Chao in the village, like, changed me as a person completely, like, for the best. Definitely some issues, but I feel like I would have got those, you would have gotten things wherever you were. If I had never pursued my career as I have, I would have grown up with regret, like, and bitterness. So it's like, I feel like you would have had certain, like, demons no matter what you do.
So it's all worth it?
Completely, 100%. I would do it again.
Wow. So when you look back on it, do you go, this is how I would do it differently?
Yeah, I mean, there's things, most of it's resources, actually. Like, for me, I didn't have any knowledge of body or conditioning, so I was quite injured, just from silly things of, like, I was still trying to do contortion. I had no core activation and things. So I'm like, oh God, I wish I had like a physio or someone who would be like, I went in there with like a program that I knew how to do TheraBand exercises, and like, so it was like those little things, and I'm like, oh, that would have been great. Obviously having mental health support would have been great, but it's almost those things are like, they weren't available at that time. So I'm like, I would have loved to have kept in contact with more people, but again, that just wasn't available. So it's like, it would be so different if I went back now and did it. You'd have different resources, you'd have so much, it'd just be so different. But I don't know, I think the way I did it was the way it was meant to happen, and I made a lot of mistakes, but I think I like learned from that. Like, Yeah.
It's what you know at the time, right? It's what
exactly.
And you don't know what you don't know.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you said that you stayed there because you had a dream and you weren't there yet.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you've reached that? Do you feel like you're living your dream?
I always, people always sort of go like, "Oh, you've made it." I'm like, "No, I've never made it." Like, like, yeah, I think because I'm never going to be like, I think I'm very, very hard on myself. So I'm never going to be like, oh, I finally like done it. Like, I worked nonstop in Europe for 6 years, in some dream contracts, which like was the dream. I remember for the New Year's, so I'd only been in the village for 2 months because I had Christmas there, I had New Year's, I had everything. I drew a Christmas tree and stuck it on my wall. That was my Christmas. And New Year's, I remember sitting there and I made a video. I think I had an old camcorder and I made this video that I actually lost because my laptop also died for a few months. So I had I lost a huge chunk of everything. And I made this video and I literally just talked into the camera for like an hour or something and was just like, said all the, like, why am I here? I'm like, why am I here? Because I have the dream. I'm going to work in Europe. Like, I know this is ridiculous, but I'm going to be on stage in Europe. Like, and I was like, this sounds so stupid saying it because I'm like, who am I to work in Europe? Some, like nobody from New Zealand, like, but it was such this, but like at the time, you're like, it felt ridiculous, but I was like, no one else is ever going to see this. This is just for me. Why am I here? Like for the days that I'm so dark, I can look back on this and be like, why am I here? And it's funny, I completely forgot about the video until like I'd been in Germany for a few years. And I was like, it was in New Year's where we always performed on stage for New Year's. We always did like a champagne toast at midnight. It was these big, beautiful shows. I was like, oh my God. Like, that's mad. Like, I'm like, I made it.
Yeah.
But then I'll be like, not yet. You got to work harder.
Like, really? Is that a constant thing that you're
always
battling?
Always.
Right. And when you say not yet, haven't made it yet.
Yeah.
Do you know what that even looks like?
No, I don't because the company I'm working for now is a company I wanted to work with for many years, and I've got to work with them. The contracts I did in Germany were absolute world class that I would never have believed I would have gotten. So, it's not, I don't think it's like a contract. I don't think it's like a literal, once I do that job, I've made it. I don't know. I guess the thing is I have made this my full-time career since, I count my career since I've been like world-class, like an international level. Okay. So that was 2015. Okay. So since then, this has been my entire career. This has been like, I love it. People always ask like, do you have a day job? Is it financially stable? And you're like, well, anyone who's very good at what they do gets paid for that. Yeah. Like if you're good at it, and like
you're world class, my friend. Apparently. Well, how many of there are you who can juggle on their feet?
There's not many of us, which is actually really cool. There's really not, and especially people who do it. There's a very like specific Russian and Italian sort of style, but people are doing it quite differently. There's not, and it was actually very, very cool. Here in Adelaide, we had in Purple Rabbit, one of our other strut shows that I helped create last year. We've got Pipsa, who is a Finnish foot juggler, who is again top in the world. She is incredible, and I'm now so grateful to call her like a friend. She's amazing. And then Tara Boom is another absolute insane performer who's an incredible foot juggler. And there was one night in Adelaide that Tara came to visit and all three of us were standing there and we're like, you don't get this. Like we don't meet other foot jugglers. And, the fact that I can put myself in their league is like, I'm like, oh my God, I'm like, like fangirling, but I'm like,
it's so the same about you.
Exactly. And that's the thing that I'm thinking is so cool that I'm like, here's these colleagues who we're like, it's so different if you were doing aerials or like hula hoops or handstands, there could be thousands of world class, like, so it's like, if you meet another person, you're like, oh, cool. You do the same thing, but we're like, oh my God, like Pipsa and I did a photo shoot yesterday together for one of the photographers here. And yeah, we were talking afterwards about like, we were like nerding out on foot juggling, like, you know, and it was so cool. But like, there's not many of us.
Exactly.
Like, and that's something that I think was a really smart decision I made when I was younger, was to do something like this. Because if I had chosen something different, something that there is a lot more performance, that just means that if you're putting your name forward for a contract and they've got 200 hula hoopers, or they've got 1 or 2 foot jugglers, and what I know that my act and what I do is so different to what other people do. I always try and incorporate my dance. I make every element of my act. I make the costume, make the shoes, make the props. So, you know, it's like, I know that even though I might be up against a different, more technical foot juggler from Italy or Russia, what I do is very personal and it is different. And then the right show will see that and be like, yes, that's what we want. Yeah. You know, so I feel like that's what has made me very hireable. Like,
actually, I was just about to ask, like, does that mean you are constantly in work? Like,
yeah, luckily, I mean, I put in many, many, many years of hard work. I remember when I first got to Germany, my first ever contract, I was just dropped into this new world where I didn't know anything. I didn't know the people. I didn't know the companies. I didn't know how anything worked. And then I learned from a lot of artists. I learned from directors, and I made a website and I made business cards that after the show, I'd go out after the show and I'd talk to people and I'd give them my card. And I sent 470 emails in a week. And I got 5 replies, and all 5 replies were offers.
And they were production company?
They were, 2 of those were international circus festivals, which are really prestigious in our field. It's like these like mini sort of like, you have them in a few different places around the world, and they're incredibly prestigious. It really is. It's like a competition.
Yeah.
And you perform in front of a panel of judges, and everyone who is there watching is directors, agents, casting, everything. So they're pretty terrifying. But yeah, I got to do 2 of those. So I was the first New Zealander to represent the country, even though no one from New Zealand knew, because I was too nervous to tell anyone. So, well, because I was by myself. My first one was in Spain, and I went there, and everyone's got their agent and their manager and their this, or their 8th generation circus performer, and all their cousins are there. And I walk in from New Zealand like, I did not know this is how it works. Like, so I was honestly so terrified. I spent most of my day meditating. Yeah. I literally just couldn't even breathe. So I would be like in my hotel room meditating before rehearsals, and then be like, okay, I'm going to go, like stand up and be like, oh, nope, panic attack. It was so scary. It was really scary, but just an incredible challenge, really, really incredible challenge, and a good way for people to see you. And then I got invited to Russia a month or 2 later, and I got to go to Russia and do another circus festival there, and yeah, very big prestigious shows and lots of media, and yeah, it's very nerve-wracking, but absolute high to get through that, you know, like, yeah, it was a lot.
It sounds so overwhelming, really. There would have been so many learning curves.
Oh, so many. Yeah.
So, and how do you take that? Because how old are you at this stage?
So I'm 33 now. It's the first time I said that out loud. It was only a few days ago. I'm like,
yes,
happy birthday. Thank you.
And so when you're in Spain,
yeah,
like how old are you then?
I think I was about to turn 26.
Wow.
Yeah.
So young. At that stage, do you go, okay, how are people doing it? Taking notes?
Yeah.
You are?
Yeah.
So what's been
talking to everyone? Yeah.
So what's been the biggest learning
experience?
I mean, I'm sure there are many.
There's been a lot. Learning from experiences. You know, I've made mistakes. I've been taken advantage of in ways of like what's asked of me in a contract. I've given way too much because I was quite people pleasing right at the start, because I was just like, I'm happy to be here. Yeah. I didn't negotiate.
You had that like condition.
Yeah, exactly. And I also didn't know how contracts work. I did not know how much the fee was that you should ask for. I didn't know any of that. This was a world I'd never known existed. So there were definitely things where I look back and I'm like, oh, I should have negotiated that contract. I should have said no to like there was things, of course, I used to like do all the costumes, do this, and then be like, oh, we need you in this little act as well, you know, and I'd jump in it instead of being like, no, that's not in my contract. If you pay me more, I'll do it. So there was a few things like that I definitely learned from. And then I just learned to also be honest with people, with my fellow performers. And, you know, you learnt people that you could really trust and be like, right, can we be frank and can we talk about money? You know, because otherwise you're going to go, you never want to undercut the industry. And if I go into a contract and I'm offered something way below, you know, the going rate, but then I say yes to it, you know, you're just bringing that standard down. So it's for the best of us as performers to also be open with each other, and then we're all going to come out better for it. So that was really helpful to just be like, just talk to people, learn from people. I was working with some of the most inspiring performers I could, like, you know, people that I'm like, I have fangirled over you. Like, I have watched you on YouTube. I've been following you even now still, you know, I'm working Angie, who's the aerialist in our show. I'm like, I've followed you for so many years on Instagram and I think you're amazing. Like, you know, like there's so many people, and it's these people that you're like, especially if they went to, you know, these really prestigious circus schools or they've worked in these big companies, you're like, how does it work in a company like that? You know, just learning the ins and learning, you know, we've got so much to like learn from each other.
Exactly.
Like,
And it's such an interesting, I mean, it's not interesting. I mean, that's how it should be. Like, you know, we're all here to learn and grow and help each other. And yet sometimes, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming, you know, that performance industry, it's very, I mean, there's competition as well. So it can be really cutthroat and not so nice. So how have you managed that?
I've definitely dealt with that in certain contracts. I've dealt with some pretty horrific sort of, I think it all stemmed from jealousy, actually. And so that was really cutthroat. That was really when you were like, people were watching you from the wings to make sure you know, if you made a mistake, they were going to go and, you know, telling you, and they'll, you know, like, and that all came from just like a deep insecurity of those performers. But it was really hard to not take that personally. And that also showed me, that was a really good lesson working with people like that. Actually, before that, I was very defensive when people would like ask, you know, like, when are you going to start your real job? Or like, you know, like, when are you going to get this little circus thing? It's not going to last forever. And I'll be like, I'm doing this until I'm in my 60s. This is my career. This is going to be my life. And like, I was very strong about that. I was very defensive.
Well, it is offensive.
We're
talking about
it is career, exactly. And people just like, exactly. And then they're like, well, it's not going to last forever, is it? And you're like, thanks. But I worked with some artists who were very, very successful, had incredible careers, were very famous. But it was the only thing they could do. And then they were very bitter about that, you know, because they knew they were coming to the end of their career. So they were just like, they were threatened by everyone coming up under them. And that bitterness just took over their personalities. And it was really like, I was like, wow, like it nearly killed my spirit for the whole love of it as well, because I was with this certain cast for 14 months. So, you know, that's a long time to have a toxic work environment. And so it really did nearly sort of kill my love of it. But it also made me think about who I am as a person outside of performing, because I'd now seen these people who it's their entire identity. Entire identity. And it was like, I don't want to do that. Like, I've got one life. Like, God, there's so much more to life. There's so much more to me as a person. You know, like, I'm passionate about this. I love it. I've worked really hard at it. But then I also like, I'm just like, you've got one life. Like, so it was a good lesson to learn. It was a hard one again, but it was really important.
So you said you thought about it?
Yes, definitely.
What does that look like?
I don't know specifics. I definitely know sort of I've spent a lot of time in the last few years being completely as far from performance as I can be. Spent time in Africa working with humanitarian organizations and AIDS organizations. Also spent quite a few months in the Philippines and Thailand working with human trafficking and child sex slavery. And so that ignited an absolute another, it sounds strange calling it a love, but it's like working in response trauma is my another, just it's where I feel really at home. So luckily, my silver lining of the pandemic was I got to spend 2 years working, volunteering in trauma and palliative care.
Wow.
So yeah, I love it so much. And it's a completely different, it could not be further from performing.
Yeah.
But it's where I am most probably genuinely myself.
Incredible.
Right.
Number one, how did you go, I'm going to go here and I'm going to do this? And then in the middle of it all, how are you managing? I mean, because that's full on.
Yeah.
How are you? How?
So I think the first time I went, the first time I sort of volunteered was in Africa. So I gave myself, I'd been working in Germany for 5 years straight. Mm-hmm. So that I finished a 14-month contract. The next day I caught a train. I started a 5-month contract. The next day I caught a train. I lined them up. Wow. And then I was like, oof. Yeah. I need a break. I need to find out who I am outside of performing. So I spent a lot of time just being like, right, I'm going to give myself this break. I knew I had another contract. So I gave myself 3 months. And that was when I went to Africa, and I did... I wasn't too sure what I wanted to. I knew I wanted to volunteer, but I didn't know specifically what area. And I didn't think I had the strength to work with people in need. Like I was like, that's heavy. Yeah. So I actually did a few wildlife conservation sort of projects first. And then I did worked with a very, very small ground roots AIDS organization. Mm-hmm. And that just... I was like, this is, I need to be with people. Like, and the language didn't matter. The conditions, I was working with people who were in the process of dying from AIDS. And, I wasn't medical, so I couldn't change the dressings, but I could be there to be a human support. I could be there to look this person in the eyes and be like, squeeze me, like let the pain out of me, exactly. And just be a person. Yeah. And so I was like, oof, like, so I did that. I went back to Germany and had a 3-month contract, and it felt very strange going back. Almost like I was like, I stress a lot before I go on stage. I get very nervous. And so when I was in Africa, I was like, you cannot go back now and stress about like going on stage after everything you've seen. Like, yeah, so I tried to like, yeah, exactly. I tried to sort of remember that. And then as soon as I came back, I was like, right, where am I going next? I need to, so I did a lot of research. And I found a really beautiful organization in Thailand that was working with human trafficking and border crossings. And then I applied for these like almost like internships. So I did a lot of like actual interviews, and I had to write out my whole, like my story. Like I had to tell these people why I wanted to come to them, which was actually quite cathartic to like write it all down. And then I ended up in the Philippines with a beautiful organization that was, I was actually in a safe house for young female victims who had been taken from positions of sexual abuse. And so that was just incredible to just be living with the girls. So there, it was actually very interesting. I never thought of crossing my two worlds. Everyone always goes, oh, you could teach circus and, developing. I'm like, no, the whole point of me doing this is to show that I am, to enjoy life outside of circus. That doesn't define me as a person. I could teach if I wanted to, but I don't want to. That's not the only thing I can do. But then I found Chameleon, and I had a conversation with the founder, and then she was like, we have a circus, we teach circus as a form of rehabilitation for these girls. And I was like, oh, for God's sake. So it was actually really beautiful because I had a lot of room to connect with the girls, and it was just beautiful. So we really used circus, and then I brought in more movement and music as a form of rehabilitation, and also expression, reconnecting with their bodies, their bodily autonomy and trust with each other. And it was just beautiful. It was really lovely to just be like, empower these girls, give them just like a sense of ownership again. And we were starting with, it was, some girls, it was like just after a few weeks to get them to actually come join,
Yeah.
you know, was massive, was like absolutely incredible, you know, like to get them to walk from one corner of the room to the other with their head held high.
Yeah.
That was like the absolute, like, you know, like it was incredible. So it was really, it was just just incredible time spent with them. Like I just was like, oh, and I'm shadowed quite a lot of the we had like psychologists and therapists and outreach as well. So I would spend a lot of time. We were in a very, very small village, and then I would visit some of the other villages, and we would visit some of the other girls or like recent court cases, and visit police and just talk through some of the things and learn a lot about the culture and the
so when you're not teaching them, you know, helping them move with their bodies, what else are you doing?
So that was when I was doing that, I was spending time with I was going out on outreach programs, and so we'd be going out, we'd be making connections with like there'd be like ongoing court cases.
So what's your role?
I was literally just shadowing. I was just there because I had no I had no education in that sense. So I just asked, the organization was amazing. I just said to them, like, look, this is an area I want to work in. Can I just be a part of it as much as possible to get experience, to witness things, to see if I'm okay with it, to see if you know, like, so they were great. Once they sort of realized that, they were just like, right, we're going to this, do you want to come? And then I wrote a lot of like almost like guidelines for future teachers and things like that. So I made a whole lot of like paperwork and stuff that they could look through, and like just writing everything really sort of basic in the sense of respect and, you know, like asking for boundaries, you know, just like, so I just made a lot of sort of resources for them in the future. And then a lot of time was just spent with the girls. You know, like if someone wants to come play or someone wants to do some art or something, you know, like just learning from them and what they needed in that moment. I mean, you know, having that boundary and having healthy boundaries, and it was
so incredible.
It was a lot.
You said that, you know, you're not defined by what you do, but what you do, like you've given a whole new meaning to what you do. And help people. You know, in so many ways. That's so incredible. Girl, you have made it. You're making a difference. Like you really are.
Thank you.
It's such incredible and important work.
And that's the part that I'm really excited about. Like I'm like what's the future going to bring, in that sense of like, I still love performing. I never want to end it too soon, because I think I'd hate to have that regret that, you know, that you're like, oh, if only I'd done a few more. But I think I would be able to, like, that's what the balance I'm trying to figure out now is like how to prepare for that next step while still living this lifestyle and still performing, because it's possible. Like, it's totally possible.
Yes, it is.
It is. It's just gonna be hard.
And you're really good at listening to your gut.
Hopefully.
It's got you here.
Yeah, exactly.
Emma, this has been so amazing. Looking back over your career, what has been the most memorable experience positively?
Oh gosh. Oh, that's so hard. It's really, really hard. There's so many things, like, and for so many different reasons, you know, like, God, having my family come watch, you know, like my sister just came to Sydney and saw me in Blanc. And I was like, she'd never seen Blanc. Like she'd seen me in Germany in 2016.
Wow.
Where I just did my, you know, thing. So having her come watch that was like incredible, because she's been on my journey with me, you know, like, but yeah, just any, like, there's just so many things. I always get asked this question, and it's never like this one performance. It's always like, I think for me, it would be like the places I've been able to work, you know, been 150 kilometers north of the Arctic Circle doing a show for a small village in Finland, you know, and you're like, what?
What am I doing?
What? But you're like, there's a wolf outside. There's snow up to here, and I'm like looking for the northern lights. I'm like, what is my life like? And then I was on a cruise ship, and there was an active volcano, and we've just finished this amazing show with a company I wanted to work with forever, a director I wanted to work with forever, and we're drinking cocktails on the rooftop of a cruise ship, and we're like, that's an active volcano, and we're in the Mediterranean. What? Like, you know, you're like surreal. There's so many of those moments that are just pinch me moments.
Yeah.
Like, I got to work in Venice for like multiple months, and it was just like every day was a dream. I was just so grateful, you know, like, and that's something I always strive to, like, I never want to forget, you know, I never want to take things for granted. I never want to be like, oh my gosh, I don't like this hotel room, meh, like, you know, like get caught up in those little things. I'm like, I love going to work every single day. I get to travel the world. Like, this is insane, you know? So it's like just being grateful for those like little things.
Yeah.
Like,
amazing.
Yeah.
You're awesome. What is next? So we're recording right now, and this is the last week of Fringe.
Yes.
So what's happening after this?
So after Fringe, well, we've created a brand new world premiere show here. So we are now going to take it for a Newcastle season. So we've got I think on the 27th, we open for 5 weeks in Newcastle. I'm going to disappear to Indonesia for a week before that to go scuba diving.
Nice.
Because that's my happy, that's like my happy place. So I'm like, I'm going to go do that. Yeah. And then we've got 5 weeks in Newcastle. And then at this stage, I'm not too sure what's after that. There's a few different options, talking to a few different people and different things. So yes, let's see what happens. See what happens. Yeah. There's like some exciting things. Awesome. So yeah.
Glad to hear it. This has been amazing, and I'm just so incredible what I've learned about you today. You've just led the most incredible life, and I'd love to know what you would tell someone who wants to perform, whether it is in circus or dance or aerial work, like whatever it is. What's your advice to them?
Take risks. Do the scary things, move away from home, you know, like that's it. Those are the things that, you know, like if it's in you, like, you know, that's that whole trusting your gut. If that is something that is so in you and you know you want to do it, and the thing that's stopping you is like, it's a bit scary, you know, or you're going to have to leave your native language, you know, like, or your hometown or your friends or your family. Like, those are the things that like, that really, like, the bigger steps you take, I feel like the bigger potential there is, you know, like, so I would just, yeah, take a risk. You won't regret it.
Amazing. Emma, you've been awesome. Thank you so much for chatting with me.
No, thank you. It's been so good.
That was the incredible Emma Phillips. If you want to follow her and her journey and where she's going to be performing next, make sure you follow her on Instagram. She has an incredible website as well. I will link all of those in the show notes for you to check her out and follow her journey and continue to support her. If you loved this episode, please share it with your friends. If you've seen the party, I'd love to hear from you and what you thought. And I know she would love to hear from you as well. So if you want to share this episode, maybe on your Instagram stories, and tag us both in the Instagram story and tell us what you thought of it, that would be incredible. We really love connecting with you. As always, thank you so much for tuning in. I would love it and appreciate it if you could leave a review and subscribe to the channel. Have an awesome day, week, month, and year. Stay awesome. We'll catch you next time.